Hello, friends. I'm Devendra, your host for the podcast, and you're listening to Life of a Researcher Stories Beyond UI. So, friends, in this episode of the podcast, Life of a Researcher Stories Beyond DOI, we have with us Professor Kirti Mishra. She has done her PhD from Monash University and her Master in Business from University of Queensland in Australia. So, both the degrees from Australia. And right now, she is working as a faculty at IIM Udaipur in OB and HR area. Uh, so I got to know about Kirti. I got to know Kirti a bit while working on a research project with her. This was on a trekking group, and I hope through this interview, in fact, all of us will get to know a lot more about her as a person. So, welcome, Kirti.
Thank you so much. That was a very nice
Yeah.
introduction. Thank you.
So, Kirti, since this podcast is about life of a researcher, now the biggest question is getting into the research itself.
Right.
Because being a researcher is a big decision. There are a lot of failures, then there are a lot of rejection, then acceptance. No, a lot of failures. So what made you get into this field? What made you decide to be a researcher?
Right. I think for me, it wasn't just being a researcher, but I think the important, we have to go back a bit in time. The decision was to actually shift from natural sciences to social sciences. So I was brought up in a typical household where, science is everything. Science is the key to success. Therefore, in CBSE board post 10th, I chose physics, chemistry, biology. Very bad at maths, hated it. Fortunate to have parents who understood that. And CBSE has a lot of other options, which I love. It's maths not the end of the world. So I took psychology, and I think that was my first tryst with, even though psychology is a pure science, right? But it was my first tryst with understanding behavior. And um, I don't know how my training in biology, the way pure sciences do teach you how to think in a certain way, and there's so much time that you spent on experiments. You learning about how things are behaving. If you're doing experiments in chemistry, you're looking at the chemical side of things. Biology, we're constantly learning how the body is behaving. Obviously, there's a different side to it. Um, and then so I found psychology fascinating. I loved it. I did good in that. But again, like I said, a lot of times in India we have this very narrow vision of what we can do, what we can't do. And around me also, everybody, like, if you were smart, if you were intelligent, and if you wanted to do good in your life, you took science and you continued with that. Um, so post class 12th also, I took up bachelor's in science. And I was quite interested in the applied sciences, so biotechnology and genetics. I loved. This was also the same time when there was a lot of fanfare around the genetic code, and that the human genome had actually been mapped. So those things excited me. But here, what's important to know is that I was very keen on moving out of India for my studies. It was, I still don't remember why that sort of seed got planted in my head. Um, I've been raised as a very independent individual by my parents, but I never really lived away from them. Never went to a hostel during my school days. Um, my dad was in a government service, so we are quite adaptable that way. Like, I was born in Western India, and then I've lived in East India as well. So different cultures, and just, there have been times when we were in school for even 8 months. I remember being in a school just for 8 months, and you're pushed to sort of, make friends. I remember having this conversation with my dad that, what am I supposed to do, right? We knew that we'd be in that school for 8 months. I'm like, how do I make friends? Because I know that after 8 months I have to leave the school. And he said, well, That's life. And you have to,
Mhm.
right? If you want to have a good school experience, you better talk to people. um, so that adaptability was there. But my dad, sort of counseled me, and rightly so, said that you've never been outside home. You've always been, in that safe environment. So before taking that leap, going overseas to
Mhm.
study, why don't you first stay outside of home and study, do your undergrad somewhere which is not home, um, and then see how it goes. So that's where I decided to do my undergraduation in Bangalore. So it wasn't
Mhm.
purely that, okay, this is a great university and therefore I should go. It was also driven by that decision that I wanted to go overseas and study, and this is going to be a dress rehearsal or a dry run. The course that I was doing while I was doing my undergraduate, we also had an element of management studies into it. There was
Mhm.
the college was offering a value added program in management, and I said, why not? Right, I'm here. I had kind of already made up my mind that I wanted to go to Australia to study, um, simply because I felt that, mostly Indians end up going either to the US or the UK. And I wanted to, again, I've been that person where I will end up trying to challenge myself. So I was like, you know what, I'll go to a place where you don't hear about Indians a lot. And that's how University of Queensland, it's a great university, it's one of the best universities in Australia. So I did all of that research, and doing all of that research was also part of the fact that, I had to prove to my dad that I'm independent and I can make all these decisions by
Mhm.
myself, you know get an admission letter. And this is where I was presented with this interesting dilemma, because I had the choice to continue with a master's in biotechnology. um, and and as I was looking through the brochure, I also realized I was eligible to do a master's in business. And um, and I thought about it. I love science, right? Don't get me wrong. I love science. There are still concepts that I remember, because of the sheer fact that I enjoyed learning about them. Again, that the thing of, challenging myself was also playing in my head. I talked to my dad. I talked to a couple of his friends also. Um, and if you see, one thing was very clear for me, Devendra, that I had to come back to India. I wasn't planning to immigrate. And if we look at India in terms of employability, we'll see that, there's a lot of transition from STEM into management, if you want to further your career. So a lot of people said that, even if you do a master's in biotechnology, eventually you might have to go for an MBA if you want to make
Mhm.
it big in India. So that also influenced my decision. Um, I did have an inclination towards understanding people side of things, more into behaviors. And since childhood, I've always been a people's person, if you may use that term. Quite adaptable, getting along with people, decent communication skills, and I think a lot of management and social sciences is essentially good communication skills. So all of those factors, when I sort of did a cost benefit analysis, I decided to shift from natural sciences to masters in business. And dear god, that was a crazy learning curve. I hadn't anticipated it to be that, I wouldn't say challenging, because there was a part of me which was also enjoying it a lot. There was a part of me which was prepared for it, as well, because I knew I was making a big change, big shift. Um,
Mhm.
and it was also challenging because suddenly the education, the style had changed, right? The pedagogy that we followed in Australia was very different. Um, there
Mhm.
was a focus on writing essays. I still remember, you said you talked about failures. I still remember in term one we had the course OB, and now, dear Lord, I
Mhm.
teach OB now. That was probably the worst assignment that I wrote. Um, And I worked, so what makes it bittersweet is I really worked hard on it. So that was the first research essay we had to write, and I had never written a research essay. So going through a literature review, coming up with a question, and it was, we could make it empirical also. So I did an interview. So I tried my level best. I even finished it before the time, before submission, so that I got it reviewed by a student counselor and everything. Uh, and still, just so we have credit, we have distinction, and we have higher distinction. And I got a credit on that. I remember I just felt that, oh my God, what have I done? And it questioning that entire decision of mine, that I have taken this decision to shift to social sciences, to management, and a credit is not going to suffice. And what have I done? um, I couldn't. And at that time, what was even, what was challenging was that I could possibly not have done anything differently. I could not have put in more hard work, because I was already, like, I used to spend 18 hours a day sitting in the library. So it's like there is no way humanly possible for me to increase the amount of hard work. But you have to at times make peace with the fact that, okay, I put in all the hard work, but there are certain things which are just not under my control. I didn't understand what was the assignments requirement properly, and I didn't do a good job, as expected by the instructor at the time. Um, so I sort of, with the help of the student counselor, I sat down, I remember, and understood, okay, where had I gone wrong? Talked to a couple of other peers as well, that, okay, where is it that I've gone wrong? So it was that case, where I'd worked hard, but in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
So that's why, it was really important at that time to figure out where had I gone wrong. Um, so through all of that, through that exercise, and still remember when I got the first term results and I got a dean's commendation for high scholarly achievement. That really reinforced that,
Mhm.
okay, I had not taken a wrong decision. I can do this. And I started realizing that I actually like to do these kind of, research papers. I like
Mhm.
to question what has been done. um, so 2 terms into my postgraduate, people had already started talking. My peers had already started talking about what's next. Um, are we applying for jobs? Those who were planning to go back to India, my Indian friends, they were talking about what the job market looks there. There were a lot of people who were planning to stay back in Australia, and looking at all of that. And honest to God, I had no idea. So one of the courses that I did enjoy the most in my time at UQ was strategic management. I absolutely loved the rigor of the course, and I loved the professor who was taking that course. And I think, again, that course was challenging and it took most of the time. Like, I think in a week we used to, at least I used to give around uh, 50 to 60 hours just preparing for that course. But that's how much I just enjoyed it. So the Professor Ray Zamuto, he was kind of like a default. He'd become a default mentor, like, because of the course, because I used to constantly go to him and ask about extra readings if I didn't understand something. So we had developed that mentorship mentee relationship. So when everybody was talking about what next, I went to him. I was like,
Mhm.
everybody's talking about what next, Ray, and I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know. I've not even decided what's going to be my specialization. I like this, I like this, I like this. So I don't know. And so we were just, we went for a cup of coffee and we were talking about, well, what is it that, excites me. And from that conversation, we realized that what excites me is being around people, and learning a lot from people's experiences. Because even in my master's class, I was the only one. I mean, I was the only one who was an Indian. I was the youngest in the class, and the only one who had no work experience.
Hmm.
And yet, I used to have examples, because I really believe that, we don't have to do everything on our own. We can learn from other people's experiences. So I used to
Hmm.
spend a lot of time, talking to people, asking, what they do in work, right? One of my friends used to work in one of the big mining companies there, um, and so at times I used to just go to her place on at lunch hour, and just to see, just to get a feel of what is this corporate life, what do people do at work. Here
Hmm.
I am, reading about it, but what is it? What does that look like? And for all my assignments during my masters, I made it a point to collect primary data for them. I approached Australian companies, through friends, through the international office at UQ. But I made it a point that there should be an element of data there. And that's why those, when I produced those reports, they were quite meaningful, because
Hmm.
there was evidence. It wasn't just me thinking about it in my head and going only looking at the literature. So through all of that, Ray suggested that maybe I think of a PhD, or and in Australia it's also called as higher degree research. So I said,
Hmm.
Fine," and I'll be very honest. Like I said, um, there's not a huge academic inclination in my extended family. So don't a lot of people don't know about this. My dad is probably was now was probably the most educated at the time, having done his engineering. Um, but for him, life changed because of education. So as when we were little, also this idea, this was sort of embedded in us that education gets you a lot of privileges, and education is very important. It's not just important because, okay, you can get a decent job and make a living, but to be a responsible citizen, education is important. But even my dad had no idea that there could be a PhD in business or a PhD in management. So then I went and, as you do, I went and I read up a lot. um, I looked at the FPM programs in India as well, and I looked up at programs in Australia. Now, the thing with the Australian PhD is that you need to have certain research experience before you can apply for a PhD. So you
Hmm.
either they have something called as an honors, which is a bachelor's and then a research element to it, or in my case, I was informed that I can convert my master's in business into a master's in business with research, that I undertake an 8-unit research project, which is equivalent to doing an honors. And for that, I needed to
Hmm.
do some prerequisite methodology courses, and I needed a supervisor. So Ray was already my default mentor, and I approached him with this idea that, I want to look at leadership and I want to look at born global firms. Can we work around it? He said yes. And next thing I know, I was, on this very lonely journey. Um, I was, there was no cohort. That's when I realized the phrase that research is a lonely journey at times. Um, all my friends were doing coursework. I did not have any
Hmm.
classes with them. My methods classes were with PhD students. Um, there was a lot of independent learning. Um, I didn't have classes. I was working one on one with my supervisor. Exercise, I mean, there were a lot of tears. Um, like I said, it was a lonely journey because, but I remember being so elated, every time I would come back from an interview. It would feel like, okay, I have learned something new. Every time when I would have my
Hmm.
supervisory meetings and Ray would ask me a question and I wouldn't have an answer, and it meant that, okay, I have to go back, I have to read literature, I have to go look at my data. Um, and just that exercise, while challenging, there was just something exciting in that whole exercise. And then finally, submitting the thesis and getting the feedback from two experts in that field, um, that meant the world to me, and sort of
Hmm.
cemented that idea that yes, research is for me.
Hmm.
So if I had to say it, I don't think it was a very concerted effort on my side that I want to get into research. There were a couple of things maybe in my personality, in my way of thinking, which were aligned with what you need for research. um, but that mentorship helped. And that's why I'm
Mhm.
somebody who always encourages. I have my own students and I
Mhm.
always encourage them, have a mentor, have somebody
Mhm.
who understands where you're coming from. And
Mhm.
in my case, if it wasn't for Professor Ray, I don't think that
Mhm.
I would have necessarily walked down this road,
Mhm.
because research, and that too in management studies, um, I mean, even now people in my family don't know what I did. So there you go. uh,
So one thing you quite said that no, you always wanted to move out of the
yeah.
country and you chose to be in the Australia. You must have definitely noticed difference in cultures between these countries, and especially since you again shifted back to India and that to Udaipur, IIM Udaipur.
Yeah.
No, what are the differences between the cultures in the organizations and even otherwise in these countries and the different organizations you have
Right.
worked?
Boy, Devendra, it's I used to because I used to move around in a lot of expatriate circles. I used to hear these terms that the culturation, the acculturation, and the reverse cultural
Mhm.
shock. And I used to be like a bit skeptical. It's like, how much? What are you talking about cultural shock? Like, come on, we live in a globalized world. Um, I have when I first moved to Melbourne, one of my dear friends, I'm like, he and I bonded over the fact that we watched Gossip Girl and how disappointed we were in the finale of Gossip Girl. So in my head, I always thought that we're all being exposed to same things. So are we really that different? Um, Maybe on the surface, yes, we're not that different. But surely when it's the iceberg model, right? Sheen, when he talks
Mhm.
about culture, so much is unhidden, and you have to peel the layers of that onion. I think I'll tell you a couple of things that have worked for me. I was very clear from day one that I'm going to return,
Mhm.
right? And that meant that I worked and I was going to return to academia. So I very strategically, I would always, like, every year, I would always submit a paper to an Indian conference, um, so that I know the names of the people. I know what is happening, right? So I always sort of had an eye out on what were the developments. And I think that kept
Mhm.
me prepared, that okay, when I come to India, how I'm going to work with the shock. Now the cultural shock happens at two levels. There's one wherein, I don't know, this is a thing, right? When we leave our country, we feel that our country is going to remain exactly the same. Hello, that doesn't
Mhm.
happen. So returning to India
Mhm.
and finding that the country had moved by leaps and bounds. I wouldn't say in the right direction or wrong direction, but it had definitely moved. So there was that. Personally, it was a shock because now I had spent around 6 or 7 years living by myself in a
Mhm.
different country. So I had become, obviously, when my dad used to visit me and all of that, but I have become a different person. Uh, and then
Mhm.
comes the professional part where when we if I could use the term, I would use the term of identity. I'm a citizen of India. That is one identity, right? It's my national identity. But my academic training has been in Australia. My understanding of what is research, what is good research, how should we go about methodologies, how I have been exposed to research philosophy, all of that is very much embedded in the Australian concept. So I have an I have a national identity which is Indian, but my academic identity is very much Australian. The way of
Mhm.
working, right? If I could say, it's part of my professional identity is very much Australian, because that's how I have worked. And I'll share with you an example. I told you, right? I did interviews in Australia. So the common way here, right? You would go. There are a lot of, so if you're trying to, let's say, you're trying to work in the energy sector. So in Australia,
Mhm.
there's a lot of events that happen, and a lot of networking events are being organized in that sector. So you try to, you go to these events, you meet people, people will, you pitch in your ideas, people will give you their business cards, and you write to them and they get back to you. Or even, for my PhD study, right? The organizations that I looked at, they have their, emails on their websites. All right, it takes time. It's not like I write to them now and today morning I have an answer. It will take a couple of days, but they write back. Okay, that doesn't happen in India.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody answers emails unless you know somebody. And and just the fact, I was so overwhelmed because even though you have mails, people use WhatsApp every time. For everything under the sun, there is a group. And unless you don't know somebody, nobody's going to reply to your email. And I didn't know what to do, because I'm not kidding. In Australia, once you have somebody's email, all the conversation happens over an email. Unless there's a real emergency, um, people don't call each other, people don't WhatsApp each other. You will email people and work will get done. And that's how I would coordinate with my research participants. And here the funniest thing was, so I had been invited by IIM Lucknow, and you know this was and so I came down. So in IIM Lucknow also, you have your interview, you do your presentation and everything, and that's the process for selecting the faculty. So I fly down, and there was an email, and there was hardly any information in the email, like what time. The email didn't even say what time I was supposed to report to IIM Lucknow campus. um, and then they have to they have a campus in Noida, they have a campus in Lucknow. And they had asked me to come to the Noida campus, and we did our I did my presentation, they had a question and answer, they liked me. And while I was waiting, all of a sudden they're like, oh, um, today evening we need you to fly with one of our faculty members to the Lucknow campus. And I was like, dude, you need to tell me. I've just been on a 14-hour
How?
flight from Melbourne. That would never happen in the Australian context, but here they were just like, nah, it's we will fly you and you'll be back on time. um, and so this is also I did join Lucknow, Devendra, and couldn't adjust. And again, you talked about failures. I don't know if this was a failure. On paper, me joining IIM Lucknow was the perfect fit, because they were giving me a teaching position in my area of expertise in sustainability. And the best part was that I was going to be working from the Noida campus. My home is in Noida. And of course, Delhi's there. So on paper, perfect. But I think it didn't work out because I was not a cultural fit. Like I said, little things like, you send me an email, you don't just call me. I I just, I'll be very honest. The Australian way is that you're calling someone only when it's an emergency, or if you're a dear friend of mine, then you call me. Because we have established that norm. Um, I used to even get freaked out when I would have people calling me. The second learning cultural difference was that in India, the IIMs, it's all residential. Uh, so for me, even adjusting to the working hours, it took some time. So having said that, in PhD, in research, you don't really have working hours. But I think when you're working, you do need some sense of an idea, right? Okay, that if we are scheduling meetings, we're not going to be scheduling a meeting specifically at 9 p.m. Why not schedule a meeting early in the morning? um, Even with the students, I just felt that I had taught in Australia, and I realized here it's a bit different. um, you know um, the kind of questions that you get from them, they wouldn't read at times, and they're just asking you questions. In Australia, I found that the students who do show up to your classes are there because they actually want to learn. um, Here that was different. People are, people are in classes because they've been told to. Most of the time it's mandatory, attendance is mandatory, therefore they show up. um, and working with colleagues as well. Like I said, it just, my academic identity did not fit in with the culture at IIM.
Mhm.
And I remember how I made the decision to quit IIM Lucknow. One fine day, I got up in the morning and I was so physically, emotionally, mentally tired, um, that I was actually thinking of asking the office to reschedule my class. And I felt that,
Mhm.
okay, teaching is something I enjoy. I love teaching as much as I love
Mhm. Mhm.
research. Um, and like I shared with you, I'm a very people's person, and I love learning from others. So teaching is teaching is everything. And then I realized that if today I am not, if I'm tired enough to not go to a class, then this is not the right place for me. It was a
Mhm.
difficult decision to leave, um, established I am Lucknow, based in my hometown, but
Mhm.
it had to be made. And I think that's what, if I had to look at this in hindsight, it was a learning experience. And I'm not just saying this, Devendra, because I I teach about culture or I teach about HRM and OB. I have seen that happen to myself. It is really important that as individuals, we understand ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, our identities, right? Like, what is my
Mhm.
professional identity? How do I like to do? What is my way of doing things? And then we look at where are we going to work. Um,
Mhm.
Especially in academia, where the work in itself is quite challenging. The work in itself doesn't really have a template. When you talk about research
Mhm.
specifically, there's no template. With all of that, you do want to ensure a place that supports you, a place that has the right culture. And if if there is, if the fit between you, an individual, and your organization is not perfect, or close to perfect, let
Mhm.
me put it that way, um, then I think it hampers your own professional and personal growth, as I saw in my case.
Mhm.
Like, my friends also tell me that I was a very unhappy person during that time. um so I think that's the learning I got from that experience, that sometimes on paper things can look perfect, but what's
Mhm.
happening behind. and and I'll say that, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that my academic identity was not that of an Indian. I would
Mhm.
probably not have reacted to a lot of things, um, if I
Mhm.
had only studied in India. There were things where, because
Mhm.
I do remember, at times talking to my friends and saying, but this is not how we used to do things in Australia. You write an email to me, you take time from me, and then
Mhm.
we talk. You don't just call me. Uh, I remember getting so upset because I was working on something. I think I had a class, and I was, I want to be in a very quiet
Mhm.
zone when I have a class. And this, I was in my office, and this PN just knocked in and came inside the office about some person who was getting retired, and we had to show up. And I lost it completely. I was like, you don't do that. You don't come and just knock and tell me to be someplace. You send the invite, I got it, and if I'm not going to be there, it's because I have something else going on. um, Teaching prep is a huge part of
Mhm.
teaching. It's not just the 1.5 hours or 2 hours or 3 hours that you're standing in class, but teaching prep is me working on that teaching. um,
Mhm.
so even, there were a few isolated incidents like that, where I felt that, okay, this isn't going to work. um, and then, moving to IIM Udaipur. So one of the things, so obviously, once bitten, twice shy. um, i I started then looking very seriously at the different IIMs. uh, I have a partiality towards IIMs purely because I have this thing in my head that I should be teaching the best minds in the world. um, and also, there's a bit of like, if nobody in my family
Mhm.
has
Mhm.
even heard of an IIM. I mean, they've heard of the they know about the prestige, but nobody's ever made it to an IIM as a student. Um, so it was this time when I was looking for a job, I specifically focused on the cultural aspect, that I need to be in an IIM where as an individual I am able to adapt, and I get a ecosystem where I can flourish. And as I was doing my research, I heard a lot of great things about Professor Janat Shah. And one thing that intrigued me is, and this is something I tell all my students, that please do your due research on the organization as well. IMU actually has this written in their on their website, that we want at least 50% of our faculty members to have a PhD from outside of India, and we are going to support that. And I remember when I was shortlisted and I came here, and they asked, obviously, right? So that's another tidbit where I found I'm a bit different. I think of interviews as conversations. So when I came to I'm there for interview also, I was like, right, you ask me questions and I'll also ask you questions. And this was the only question I had for them, that what do you mean? Like, how will you support people from overseas find their place in Udaipur? And that's when they shared about their research vision, the idea that we respect everyone's time a lot. We give people their individual spaces to flourish and be independent. And that to me was key, that's what I have become. um, as an individual, being an Indian, we come from a collectivist culture, so that's embedded in us. So we like to be involved in everything, we think about the greater good and all of that. But as an academic, what had happened was that I had become a bit more individualistic. I had moved towards that spectrum, that leave me alone when I'm working on my research or when I'm working on my teaching. um, I'm not going to show up for everything. It's my right to say no. um, Self preservation is not wrong. We need to at times practice that. But I think sometimes when we think about our Indian culture values, because we are so embedded and driven by collectivism, um, we don't value self care. Right? So I realized that that was the difference here at IMU. And so on that spectrum, in terms of my academic identity, I have moved a bit towards my individualist sides. And I'm sure my PhD students would attest to it, and my RAs and TAs would attest to that, that you book a time with me, right? You don't just pick up the phone and call me. You book a time with me, and if I promised I'm going to give you 2 hours of my time, I will. But I need to plan. My time is very important for me. I need to have my time. And I realize that that's not a very Indian thing to do.
Yeah.
And that was what was different. But this time around, knock on wood, as promised, IIM Udaipur has created a space where I'm able to express myself, express my academic identity as well. So that's what has worked. In terms of differences between profession, research and teaching. In teaching, a difference that I've observed is overseas, especially for post graduation studies, people only do it if they really want to. Whereas I think what has happened in India is it's almost become a norm. You know, you do your, you finish your class 12, you go for engineering, then maybe you work, you get placements, and you work for a year or so, and then you eventually sit for CAT and you get into an IM. It's almost, it's that template has sort of been created and developed. So I realized that there's a lot of we have to push a lot for class participation and things like that. Also placement focus. Overseas, that's not the norm. At least in Australia, that's not what we did. So we were kind of learning for learning. Whereas I felt that in India, the elephant in the room is always going to be placements. um, First year it's
Yeah.
going to be summer placements, and then In the final year, it's going to be the final placements. So that is one of the big differences that I've observed in India. In terms of working, I think a key difference has been, I think in India we predominantly find a lot of people with engineering background. Um, so in terms of doing research, there's a lot of research being done using secondary data and quantitative data. Um, and maybe it's me that I haven't been able to find a good network or a support group for doing qualitative and critical management work. But I found that to be lacking um, work wise. That's a difference that I've found.
Friends, this was Professor Kirti Mishra from IIM Udaipur, and we are not done yet with her. In this episode, she spoke about how she arrived at the decision to be a researcher and her experiences from different organizational cultures in India and Australia. I'm sure you must have found a bit of yourself in her stories and hope that you have found some answers to the various dilemmas that you are facing right now. As I said, we are not done yet with her. Join us again on the next episode of the podcast Life of a Researcher, where she speaks about the imposter syndrome and role of the mentors in her life. Till then, take care and goodbye. See you.